Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you today? I hope you're good. Today felt like a good day for me to make a video, so here I am. I'm sharing a skill with you from sensory motor psychotherapy called restoring empowering action. It already sounds good, right? And it is good. And I really hope you like it. I hope you're going to find it useful. So I'm going to be talking about that with you today. All right. So look at the picture here. We could feel empowered just like that person in the picture, okay, when we learn how to do this more effectively. All right, so what is this all about? Well, it starts with, as you can see on the left, our animal defenses, okay? So as you can see, there's little mini pictures here of fight, flight, crying for help, freezing, and shutting down. So those are some of the main animal defenses that we have. And we all are wired up to have these defense mechanisms because they're designed to help us survive. They're designed to help us deal with threat and dangerous situations. So I talked about these in past videos, and we're going to get into them a little bit more today. Okay, so ideally, we should have flexible access to these different mechanisms and be able to flexibly move from one to another depending on the situation. And our system should normally select the one that's most useful and express it in a way that's appropriate for the situation. So not too overdone if it's not necessary, or not too little, like just right, you know, and we could restore our system to do that. But a lot of times it's not working out for us right now. You know, sometimes we're very rigid with how we're applying these, or we have a favorite one. And so today we're going to talk about how we can regain flexible access to these different defense mechanisms and kind of calm them down when they're a little too much, and bring them out when they're not present, okay? And when we're able to do this, it helps us to feel competent and empowered, okay? So we feel like a little more in control also, and we feel like we can handle things better, all right? Okay, so we're gonna start by reflecting on our mobilizing defenses, okay? And just kind of talking about when they are appropriate. So we do know, because, you know, how are you supposed to figure this out if you don't know? Okay, so let's say we'll start with the fight response. Okay, so when we feel threatened, part of us might want to fight back to protect ourselves. So verbally, physically, right? Attacking another person, for example, to protect ourselves from some kind of an emotional, social, or physical threat. So when is this appropriate? When we actually feel like it's going to work, like we could actually overpower the enemy. So if you're 5 years old and a parent's attacking you, you're not going to be able to overpower the enemy, right? So fight won't work for you. But if you're equally matched with somebody, or you have some fighting skills and fight could work for you, go for it, right? That's when fight could be appropriate. Other times, in certain situations, fighting is expected. So if you're a soldier and you're in combat, you're expected to fight, right? And if you're in a gang and you're in street life, fighting is just part of everyday life a lot of the times. So in those situations, mobilizing for a fight could be very adaptive, all right? So what about flight? So flight is running away from danger, avoiding danger, and running towards safety if possible, you know? And this could be physically running or walking or leaving a situation. It could also be more subtle. It could be, let's say you're sitting next to somebody that's making you uncomfortable. Part of the flight might be like turning away or twisting away or shifting away. It's like a mini version of flight, okay? It could even trying to turn our mind away from something, kind of escapism, okay? Or doing a behavior that takes us away from a feeling or takes us away from some other thing that feels threatening to us. So flight is most appropriate when escape is likely to be successful. So if you could actually get out of the situation and move from danger to safety, that's the best time to use it, okay? If you're being threatened by a person, but you could leave the room, or you could leave the building, or you could drive away, flight is effective, right? If you're in a burning building and you want to escape the fire, flight could be effective if you can get out, okay? All right. So then another popular one, crying for help, okay? So we need each other. We can't always fight danger alone. And when we're little, especially, we need bigger and more powerful adults to help us. So it's normal for us to want to reach towards somebody that could actually provide us with safety and help that we need. Okay, so it might be somebody who, especially when you're a child, feels older and stronger or wiser or more competent than you. And if those types of people are available and they're trustworthy, then crying for help and going toward that person could be very adaptive. Okay. So seeking out someone in times of stress or threat, it's a normal thing for us to want to do, right? That's why it's inborn. We're social creatures. We're reaching for help sometimes, right? Talking about your problems with somebody, part of the cry for help response. Okay. Not wanting to be alone, part of the cry for help response. Okay, so there, on the bottom, there's a few other types of mobilizing defenses that kind of fall into like a miscellaneous category. So sometimes we have procedurally learned actions, like actions we kind of repeated sometimes and we just automatically do. So for example, like if you feel like something's falling, let's say from the ceiling or from a tree or something, and you sense it, you might automatically want to protect your head. Or if you're playing ball and someone says heads up and you just automatically do that, that's a mobilizing defense. Okay. If you're a downhill skier and you see a rock in your path, you might automatically know just how to turn to get away from the rock. Another mobilizing defense. If you drive your car all the time, it might be very instinctual for you to slam on the brake when you see something coming in the lane up ahead. Okay, so that's just a couple of examples, but we might have other, types of things that we do physically that are kind of automatic behaviors that are designed to protect us. All right. So next, let's move on to the immobilizing defenses. So defenses where we get more still, not more active. So the freeze response, okay, that's alert immobility. So we're feeling hyper aroused on the inside, but still on the outside. So it's like hitting the gas pedal and the brake at the same time. So you feel high anxiety, which is usually typical for a mobilized defense or like a hyperarousal state. But you also feel paralyzed, terrified, and agitated. So there's a stillness of the paralyzation, but there's also the activation of the terror, the fear, the agitation. Okay, so it's high sympathetic arousal. So, and also hyperattentiveness. So you might have that kind of looking out for danger kind of thing going on, like where you're hyper alert, you're scanning the environment, right? All right. Next, shutdown. So that is when you're still, but also in hypoarousal mode. So low arousal. So instead of your muscles being stiff, like in the freeze response, your muscles are more flaccid, floppy. Sometimes this defense is called flop or fold because it kind of emphasizes that kind of like collapse of your system, right? So everything shuts down, your heart rate decreases, your breathing gets shallow. It's really related to like the playing dead response, that animals do, like playing possum. You just kind of pretend you're not on purpose, but like you kind of play dead because that's the safest thing to do. Making yourself small, making yourself still, not making any sound, that's sometimes the most protective thing we can do. Okay, so when are the immobilizing defenses most appropriate? Okay, because sometimes we really do need them. They're appropriate when the mobilizing defenses would be ineffective. So if you're going to be overpowered by somebody, you won't be able to win the fight. So fighting back isn't useful. If running away isn't possible, let's say you're trapped somewhere and all the doors are closed. You can't run away, or you're too little and you can't escape that house. Where are you going to go? If crying for help can't happen because there's nobody around to ask for help, or there's nobody trustworthy to go to, you can't cry for help. So your system has a backup plan, and that's the immobilizing defenses. Okay, so it's the next safest thing and sometimes the most necessary thing. Okay. But sometimes it's important to know this because we're going to go over this later more. We have the initial impulse to engage in a mobilizing defense. So we want to fight, we want to run away, or we want to cry for help. We have the urge to do that first. That's the first thing our system wants to do. But when it's not possible, we have to switch to the immobilizing defense. And sometimes the impulse to do those mobilizing things are still buried within us because they never completed themselves. And it's kind of like they never really released. We never had that chance to discharge the energy from them. They're kind of trapped in our system. So we're going to learn later how to deal with that a little bit better. Okay, so as you probably know, being flexible is a sign of health. So adaptive flexibility with our defense mechanisms, more like the animal defense mechanisms, is really healthy. So depending on the situation, depending on when it's appropriate, we should be able to select, the most appropriate response. So when it's appropriate to fight, I should be able to have the energy to fight. When it's appropriate to run away, I should be able to find a way to run away, for example, okay? But I shouldn't always be stuck on one thing or another, okay? But sometimes that's the case, especially if you have a history of trauma, a history of attachment issues, relational stuff with your parents. Sometimes we get stuck on a favorite response and we do it way more than we should, okay? So it's kind of like a cookie cutter, like I has on the right here. So you're using the same defense sometimes for every situation. And sometimes it's appropriate and sometimes it's not appropriate. So your system gets inflexible. It's also like the quote, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So if you always are going to a fight response, everything looks like, it's gearing you up for a fight. I should be angry and combative with everything, right? I overuse that response. I'm fighting and arguing all the time. But other times, other responses may be better, okay? So if I have a favorite response, maybe it was most adaptive for me when I was growing up, and that's why I had that particular favorite response. It was the thing that worked for me, and because it helped me survive, my system decided it's the go-to default response I should keep, right? If it worked before, it should work again. Makes sense, right? So then we end up practicing it a lot because that's our system's favorite defense. So if I fight all the time, I'm always practicing fighting. So my system gets very used to going to that fight defense whenever I feel threatened, right? So it kind of gets wired in even more strongly. So then I use it all the time, whether or not it's appropriate, cookie cutter approach. And it can override other more perhaps adaptive responses. So it takes away the flexibility. So here's a couple examples. So like I said with the fight. So if fight's your default response, you might argue, become aggressive and defensive in situations where it might be more adaptive to walk away, be assertive, or get support or help instead. Right? So sometimes, how they say with anger, like just walk away. Sometimes it's like we're trying to train you to not fight with everything. Sometimes it's not worth getting into with somebody. You have to know what else you could do instead. Okay. Sometimes shutdown's our most popular response because we weren't able to fight back or flee or get help. Okay. So our system learned to shut down. So every time I get stressed out, I shut down. Okay. But sometimes right now in my life, it would be more appropriate to get support or to speak up for myself or to leave a situation rather than just be still and trapped and suffer silently and zone out. Okay, so that's where the flexibility needs to come back into our life in order to make our life more effective and better. Okay, I love this graphic. I found this kind of like an after effect. After I did the whole presentation, I found this and I thought it was great. So sometimes we're trapped in that freeze response or that, the shutdown response. And our fight and flight defenses are kind of dormant inside, but we could kind of melt the ice and start to bring them back using some sensory motor psychotherapy techniques, of course. Okay. So if we made the immobile response our habit, we could always learn to undo that and get back some of the empowerment that comes with fighting when necessary, fleeing when necessary. All right, and we could do it in an adaptive way. All right. Other times, if we have a favorite response, such as a fight response, we might go overboard with it. Like I might blow up at any little thing and it's too much, okay? So sometimes it's like too extreme or it's too problematic. It's my anger management problem is getting me in trouble, for example. And I use it all the time, it's overused. So how do I do that? Well, there's ways of regulating the overactive defenses so that they're not as extreme. So I could still use a fight response when needed, but maybe I could do it more moderately and appropriately. Okay, so how do I learn to do that? I could recognize the urge I have to engage in that response, use my building blocks, be mindful of the way it feels that I want to engage in that fight response, my system's wanting to do it. Think about notice the urge to use it, and find a way to express it in a more empowering way. So slow down the whole process, like in that little picture of the turtle. So if I want to punch somebody, maybe I'm going to slowly just feel what it feels like to just go like this really slow. Or if I want to push away somebody or something that's dangerous, I might work with a therapist or push against the wall and just push against a pillow really slowly when the other person holding it. Or I might push against the wall. I like to push against the wall. I do that sometimes too. Or there may be some other kind of action you feel like doing that expresses the fight response, but you do it super slow and just mindfully notice what that is like. Okay. And that's how you start to reset your system. All right. So we have some exercises, of course. So you'll learn more about exactly how to do this. Okay. So without further ado. So the first one is just kind of learning to recognize the animal defenses that you have within yourself. So they're just some random questions to kind of get you to reflect on times when you've experienced them and what the circumstances were, etc. Okay, so I'm going to start with the questions on the right, and you could refer to some of the information on the left, and I'll probably refer to it too. All right, so question number 1. So you can journal about this too if you like, right? When you think of something from your past or in your current life that causes you to feel unsafe, threatened, stressed, or in danger, which animal defenses do you experience? So what are the ones that come to mind first when you think about times when you've been stressed out? Okay. Then number 2, think of some situations when you've experienced the different types of animal defenses listed here. So now they want you to go one by one. All right, what was a time when I used a fight response? What was a time I used a flight response, etc. Okay. And think about, well, what were the things that triggered you? Because the triggers might be different for different responses. They may be the same, just kind of explore what comes up for you. What action urges did you experience in each category? So when you were in a fight response, for example, what did you feel like doing? Or when you were in the flight response, what did you feel like doing? All right, so I gave you some clues. Okay, so I listed some common action urges for each animal defense that you can refer to get some inspiration, some ideas, but it might be slightly different for you. Okay, so when you look at the action urges, it might sound familiar, like, oh yeah, that's right, I think I've done that. Okay, so just to prompt you. So if you use, number 4, those defensive actions, how did they feel in your body? So what did it feel like to run away? What did it feel like to cry for help, for example, or reach out to somebody? What did it feel like to freeze, right? And how did other people respond? Okay, so as I say in Radically Open DBT, there's a social signaling aspect to these things. So when they're experienced in isolation, they're just, animal defenses you experience. But when other people see them, it sends a signal to other people and people respond to it. So if you got really angry and got into combative fight mode, how did other people respond? If you cried for help and reached for people to help you, were they responsive to you? Did they ignore you? Did they invalidate you? What happened? All right, so think about how those 2 factors work for each one. So how did it feel in your body? How did other people respond? So then once you kind of do this little inventory, think about, do you have a favorite? Do you have a default animal defense that you tend to go to more often than other ones? Okay. And are there ones that you think, I almost never do that at all? Like some people tell me, like, I really just don't really get angry. Like the anger response is not one of their go-tos. Okay. So think about, is there ones that are popular and ones that are unpopular for you? All right, next. Okay, I flipped the side of the box just so to keep you awake. Okay, so animal defensive responses and the body. Okay, so of course we have to weave the body in as much as possible because it's sensory motor psychotherapy. All right, so for each defense, describe what happens when you think about or imagine executing the actions related to the animal defense. All right, so you don't have to come up with a story about it or think about a past situation. Just think, well, right now, if I were to imagine myself engaging in the fight defense, the flight defense, if I was imagining myself fleeing or running away or backing away, what does that feel like to me? Just even imagining it. All right. And we do imaginal exercises because, especially on the ones that might make you feel uncomfortable, we're just going to play with the imagination first before we end up doing anything, right? Just experiment. What does it feel like? Are any of them scary for you? Like, you're like, oh my God, like that would frighten me if I ever start yelling at people, for example, or, I'd be so embarrassed if I cried for help. Like, I feel like I should do it myself, So what are your reactions? Just imagining yourself doing these things. And you might even find that some of them might feel better than you think. Like, wow, I felt pretty empowered when I walked away. I just decided to leave and I wasn't trapped there, and that was pretty darn good. All right, so see what comes up for you. And you can journal this too if you like. Okay, so now we're going to put imagination into action. So number 2, try mindfully and slowly executing actions related to each animal defense. So you just it helps to do this with a person if you can. But if you want to do it alone, you still can. It's no big deal. Okay. And try not to come up with a story behind it. Just focus on the actual movements themselves. Okay. And do it slowly and mindfully. So like I was starting to say before, so if I slowly felt the pushing away, that has to do with the fight response, or I slowly felt like I was punching or kicking somebody, or if I said the word help me, what does that feel like? Okay. Tune in mindfully and just observe what it feels like to put it into action in a safe place. And it doesn't have to be an out of control thing. You don't have to tear up the room to practice a fight response, for example. Okay. We're just doing it slowly, mindfully. Even the freeze response, let's say. What if you were to sit really still and quiet and tense? What is that like for you? Okay, is it frightening not to move? Does it feel safer? What does it feel like? Okay, now, so replacing an immobilizing defense with a mobilizing defense. All right, so this one's related to that graphic before about the guy trapped in the ice cube that's gradually coming out. Okay, so sometimes, our mobilizing defenses were not possible or safe. So instead, we engaged in a freeze or a shutdown response because that became the next best thing, right? So if I was little, for example, I might have had the urge to fight back a difficult or a giant parent who was threatening me, but I knew I would never win. And so I ended up freezing or shutting down. Okay. But that urge to fight back might still be within me, waiting to just express itself. All right. So think about times when this might have happened for you. So take your time to search for the sliver of memory before you became immobile in which you wanted to take action. So was there a time you could remember where you wish you could have fought back, or you wish you could have run away or asked for help, but it wasn't possible, and you ended up freezing or shutting down instead? Can you remember that point in the memory, the little sliver, where you had the urge to be mobile? Okay, and just stay with that for a minute. Okay, and you might notice now, just imagining it, some tension in your body, right? So if you feel like a little tension in your leg, or a little tension in your arm, or clenching of your jaw, it might be like these little micro movements that are a sign of the defense you wanted to do. So the clenching of my fist, for example, might have been like a sign that I really wanted to deck the guy, but I couldn't finish it. Okay, so just go with what your body wants you to do now. If you follow the feeling of the urge to do the mobilizing defense, what do your body want to do? Okay, don't overthink this. Just kind of go with the flow. Just kind of feel it. So if you're starting to feel like I need to go this way, right? Just do it slowly. Okay. Or I feel the urge, like I want to just kick somebody, like just slowly kick your foot in slow motion and just feel what that feels like. Okay. All righty. Next, regulating, dysregulating, mobilizing defenses. So if your fight or flight responses were overblown, too extreme, too dysregulating, it's important to learn how to regulate them. Okay, because these could really wreak havoc in our lives, right? It really could get in the way of our relationships, of our functioning. So this is really important. So we're going to imagine a time when we did something rash, like, so you lashed out excessively, we ran away, you know, get the sliver of memory right before you wanted to do that, when you sense the urge, sense the action urge, and now execute the motion slowly and mindfully instead. So instead of being like, rah, rah, whatever it is, I'm sorry, I strained my voice saying that, you know, just do it slowly and with control, with mindful attention, and feel what it feels like, right? So again, just like the last one, let the impulse come from your body. Don't overthink it. Don't think, well, I think I was supposed to do this here. I think I was, no, put your mind aside just for a minute, sense what your body wants you to do, all right? So observe and describe the experience, try to go through it slowly, experience it now, all right? And you could go through this a few times. Like you could bring up the sliver, sense the action urge, and mindfully put it into action. Then go back to the sliver, see what comes up for you this time, maybe try it again. And if you go through this a few times, you know, everything should start to settle down. It should make your nervous system calmer. It should bring you into your window of tolerance more. The sliver might feel less triggering. So it's kind of like slowly, you know, bringing it back into a comfortable zone. All right. So after you finish the process, now we're going to check in. All right. So check in with our building blocks. So how does my thoughts going now? What's happening with my thoughts? What's going on with my emotions? And what kind of body sensations am I experiencing? Okay. So just to self-check-in to see what it was like to, you know, discharge slowly these mobilizing defenses instead of doing it in a dysregulated manner. Okay, I think this is the last one. It is the last one. Okay, so this one, a little tricky, but definitely worth it. It does help you kind of get back to a nice equilibrium, settles your nervous system. So give it a try if you're up for it. Okay, and hope to see you soon in the next video. All right, thanks everybody. Have a good one.